Good afternoon. Welcome to Design for Impact. We have about 2 minutes before we get started. So as we're waiting, if you'll just drop where you're joining from in the chat, that'll be great. We're glad that you're here with us. So far, we have about 35, 36. The number just keeps growing. So like I said, welcome to Design for Impact, our instructional design masterclass webinar series. As we get started in about 90 seconds. But until then, share where you're joining from. So we have Maryland, Tarrant County College, welcome. I'm assuming that's Texas. Kristen from Alabama, welcome. Tiffany from Texas, welcome. Eric is also from Texas. Dean from Minnesota on beautiful Lake Superior. But it's a beautiful day. Ingrid from Lubbock. Welcome. I went to Texas Tech University, Ingrid, so I spent some time in Lubbock. Douglas is joining from, let's see, Tampa. Stephanie from Tampa, welcome. We're glad you're here. Catherine from Mass. Gail from Kentucky. Misty from Oregon, welcome. Hannah from Chicago, glad you're here. I see your question, will we be receiving the recording? Yes, so everyone who registers for the webinar will receive an email that has the recording, the PowerPoint slide, the certificate of attendance, and any other resources that we share in that follow-up email that will be sent to you within 48 hours. And then also, Ben, welcome. I see your question about a lot of trainings are at 2 p.m. They are all recorded, and so we can definitely share those recordings with you. All right, so my clock says it is 2 p.m. So let's get started with our Design for Impact webinar series. So today we're going to be talking about essential questions and big ideas and really anchoring our course design around those two ideas. So like I said before, many times I forget this slide, but my name is Mandy Green. I work at GW, what's currently called Professional Services, Customer Success. But my background is teaching, education, and so I love to talk about instructional practices and instructional design. So today we're going to distinguish kind of what's the difference between a topic, a big idea, essential question. We're going to start connecting those to some deeper learning, and then you're actually going to be able to write one essential question, one big idea during this session. Make sure you know where the chat is. We'll be using the chat quite frequently. And we'll also have a few polls that will pop up, so get ready to participate in some polls. So today's essential question, since we're talking about essential questions, I figured we really should have an essential question rather than just learning outcomes or LOs. So today's big essential question is, how do essential questions and big ideas change the way students or learners experience a course? So I hope that this question invites you to engage in our discussion online today, to reflect, and then hopefully be able to transfer this content beyond this webinar into actual application and practice in your instructional practice. So I'm going to pop up a poll, so you will see it pop up on your screen. You're going to select one answer to the question, which best describes how your courses are currently designed. So if you'll give me just a moment, I'll get that poll popped up. There's a few clicks that I have to do on the back end. When it pops up, feel free to select the answer and hit submit. And then you will be able to see the responses from others as well. So that poll is launching right now. So you can actually select your type. So is it topic driven? Is it standards driven? Is it question driven? Or are you not sure? And then you hit submit, and you'll start to see some of our answers come in. So as you can see from those of us on this webinar today, so about 75 of us, most of our courses are topic-driven design courses, meaning they're created around a topic, not always created with the standards in mind first or the questions. And so we'll look at some of that and how that relates to how we actually develop courses throughout. So with that, we're going to close that poll. And in the chat, let's start with our statement. So before we get started today, when you think of an essential question, what is it? In the chat, finish this sentence stem. I think an essential question is, and then type your response in the chat. Remembering that we are all here to learn with and from each other, so there are no right or wrong answers. We're just learning today together as educators. So finish that sentence. I think an essential question is, and I appreciate you being vulnerable as we learn with each other, what the students will learn. At the end of the course, what does the student need to be able to know or do? An essential question stimulates thinking about the topic, is a basic objective, an opportunity to connect the learning outcome to the content, how to get students engaged, what students get from the course. So these are all things of what we currently think is an essential question. So hopefully over the course of the next 20 minutes, we'll learn some more that we can add to our toolbox and to our knowledge about essential questions, and then we'll look at that at the end again. So keep this in mind from the chat right now, and let's see how your thoughts evolve through the next 20 minutes. So first of all, y'all know I love to be really interactive, and sometimes we struggle with that on webinars, just with some of the limitations of technology and having to toggle multiple platforms back and forth. And in efforts to keep everything in one platform in Microsoft Teams, we're going to do a virtual card sort. So you can think of this as a card sort where you have lots of columns at the top and you have index cards that have words on them. And we're going to sort the words under the column that we want them to go under. So on each slide, I'm going to have some words. You're going to tell me if those words are an essential question, a big idea, or a topic. And you're going to do that by typing in the chat EQ if it's an essential question, the letters BI if it's a big idea, or the letter T if it's a topic. Are you ready? Okay, let's try this. So the first one is safety protocols in the workplace. Is that an essential question, a big idea, or a topic? You can add your response to the chat. So I'm seeing the letter T just like flooding the chat right now on my end. So yeah, so this one is a topic because it tells us what we're teaching, but it doesn't tell us why it matters or what students should understand. So topics are usually nouns or noun phrases. They're important, but on their own, they don't really provoke thinking and they don't guide inquiry for our students. All right, so let's try another one. Why do industry standards change over time? And how should professionals respond? Is this an essential question, a big idea, or a topic? Let's see your response in the chat. Y'all are fast on that chat today. I hadn't even finished it yet, and it's already popping in. I love it. So as you can see, I see a lot of EQs coming in. So this is an essential question because it's open-ended. It does not have a single right answer. And it's asking our students and our learners to think like professionals. It's inviting discussion, it's inviting reflection, and it's asking them to transfer this beyond the course, which is exactly what we want essential questions to do. Let's try a third one. Technical skills must be paired with communication and problem solving to be career ready. Is that an EQ, a BI, or a T? Yes, I'm seeing a lot of big ideas come in. So this is a big idea, or sometimes they're called enduring understandings, right? So it's a complete statement. It's not a question. It captures something that we want our students to understand long after they leave this course. So this idea can also anchor multiple units, projects, or assessments as the big idea. All right, we have two more. Welding fundamentals. Is that going to be your essential question, your big idea, or your topic? Let's see. Yes, so I see a lot of T's coming in for topic. So this is another topic example because it's content specific and skills based, which is common in these career and technical education classes that most of us teach in. Topics like this tell us what to include, but they don't really help us design for deeper understanding or for that transferability of knowledge. Last one. How do professionals balance efficiency, quality, and safety on the job. Is that an essential question, a big idea, or a topic? Yeah, so I see a lot of EQ coming in. So this is another essential question because it mirrors those real workplace decision making. There's also some tension here because it's looking at efficiency, quality, and safety. And so students kind of have to weigh some trade-offs there. So this kind of thinking prepares students for careers, not just tests. All right, so hopefully you got warmed up thinking about essential questions. You got warmed up identifying big ideas and topics. So what you probably notice is these statements all play a very different role in how we design courses. So our topics, of course, tell us what we teach. They're the content, like what shows up in our syllabus or the unit title. They're necessary, but they don't often drive thinking on their own. And then we have those big ideas or sometimes enduring understandings that tell us what we want our students to understand. So these are the takeaways we hope will stick years from now with our students. They kind of help us decide what's most important and what success can also look like. And then we have the essential questions, and that tells us how students will think their way there. So they create curiosity, some tension, some cognitive dissonance, and inquiry. They're also the reason students engage instead of just comply with the lesson. But when these three work together, essential questions, big ideas, and topics, our instruction becomes very intentional because we know what we're teaching, why it matters, and how students will engage cognitively. And that's the shift from covering content to really designing for understanding. All right, let's start to put this into play step by step. So I want you to think of a lesson that you will be teaching right now or very soon, or maybe in a program that you support. Think of an essential question that comes from that lesson or unit. Okay, do you have one identified? Are you Googling one very quickly? That would be me. I would be like Googling very quickly to find my essential question. Let's examine that. So now that you have an essential question in your mind, or you've Googled or pulled it up on a different browser window, does that question align with the definition on the screen? Right? Essential questions are questions that frame learning around inquiry, they provoke deep thinking, and they guide our students and learners to explore transferable ideas rather than arrive at one correct answer. So ponder for a moment, does your essential question align with that definition? Okay, let's examine that essential question a little bit more that you have from your course. Let's look at the characteristics of essential questions and see if those align with your essential question. Is it open-ended? Is it thought-provoking? Does it encourage higher order thinking? Is it revisited over time during the lesson? And does it connect the learning to the real world? So how does your essential question align with those characteristics? Okay, great. Now let's look at some examples and non-examples. So this could be an example that says, how do professionals balance efficiency, quality, and safety on the job? Does your essential question kind of look like that essential question? Or does it look like our non-example that just says, like, what are OSHA regulations? So as we really take this deeper dive into essential questions, now you can look at the definition, some characteristics, and an example and non-example, realizing that non-examples are sometimes more powerful than examples in helping us create the best type of essential question. All right. So we just went through an essential question. So we're going to do the same thing for a big idea. So you have your essential question. Now pull the big idea that comes with that essential question from that unit or larger lesson. Do you have that big idea in your head, or did you pull it up on a secondary browser? Okay, great. So let's look at the definition for a big idea. They're declarative statements that capture the most important ideas for our students and our learners, which they should understand and retain long after the course ends. Does your big idea for the lesson the unit you are currently teaching or you will be teaching or support align with that definition? Okay. Now take a moment and see how it stacks up against some of these characteristics. Is it written as a full statement and not a question? Is it also transferable across contexts, and careers? Does your big idea anchor that unit, that lesson, and those assessments? And your big idea should focus on understanding, not necessarily those skills. How does your big idea align with the characteristics you see on the slide? And this is a great time to make notes if you want to make your big ideas or EQs even better. All right, let's look at examples and non-examples. So an example of a big idea could be something like workplace safety depends on consistent decision-making, not just rules. Does your big idea sort of look like that big idea? Or does it look like the non-example that looks like OSHA standards? Because in all honesty, sometimes when I had to write out my big ideas, my enduring understandings, and all of this in lesson plans when I was teaching, sometimes my big ideas looked like OSHA standards. But now that we're learning more, we can apply and make it look more like workplace safety depends on consistent decision-making. All right, so we've gone through and now really looked at essential questions. We've defined them. We've looked at characteristics, examples and non-examples, as well as big ideas. Let's start to pull this back together. So if it can be answered with a definition, a list, or even a Google search, it's probably not an essential question. So we know that essential questions pull students into this ongoing thinking and professional judgment. And we know big ideas are what we hope students will understand a long time from now. And it helps decide what's worth spending time on and also what really success can look like in the classroom. So let's open this up in the chat. This is another opportunity for us just to kind of share with everyone, to learn with and from everyone in this today, all 80 plus of us. What's one misconception you've had about essential questions? And as you're typing that in the chat, I'll share with you a few misconceptions I have worked through as a teacher over the last couple of decades, right? So when I first started teaching, I really thought an essential question was just like a learning outcome or objective written as a question. Boy, was I wrong. And then I started thinking, I kind of thought, well, like any question could be an essential question, right? And I thought that because I thought writing these big, eccentric questions would slow down learning. And I really didn't think my students paid attention to essential questions, right? But what I realized is these essential questions, they don't slow down learning. They help shape how our students think. So when I started looking at it from that perspective, I felt like my viewpoint and how I worked with essential questions in the learning process changed. So those are a couple of my misconceptions. Share with us any misconceptions you've had about essential questions in your role as instructor or supporting instructor, because I'm quite sure we've all had them. Like mine, I thought they were just a question. I thought they turn a learning outcome into a question, and there's your essential question. It's not. So some other misconceptions, and I like your vulnerability. Thank you for just sharing so we can learn from each other and kind of validate each other. The essential question is not right or wrong answer. Yeah, George thought like EQs were tied to learning outcomes in the course. Me too. I've been there. I thought like, I'll just turn my learning outcome into a question and there's my essential question. I've totally been there. So it's talking about it was asked at the beginning and only answered at the end. Absolutely. I have totally been there. I feel like I'm still there sometimes teaching. Yeah, Stephanie, same. I feel like there's just these things that always appear in lesson plans and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this essential question, right? I don't know how to anchor my course design in this. So hopefully we'll continue to get a few more ideas of how we can anchor our course design in with these essential questions. So we have learned kind of what they are. We've learned some characteristics of them. We just looked at some misconceptions. And so now let's start like thinking and sharing some. And so also, this does not have to come from your course. Feel free to open up another tab or another browser and do a little bit of Googling or Google on your phone, and you can type in the chat. So what we're going to do for the next just a couple minutes, real short, we're going to have a version of Think, Pair, Share. So we're not going to do a full Think, Pair, Share because it's virtual. We're going to do what I call a Think, Share. So I'm going to show some stuff as prompt on the screen, and I would just love your input and examples that you can think of to drop in the chat. So once again, think of that course or unit that you're teaching or that you support. It can be the same essential question or big idea that we were pondering about as we were going through the Freyer model to breaking down what those definitions were. And let's talk about this. So in the chat, share some type of big idea in a unit that you are currently teaching or supporting, or you have recently taught, or you will be teaching. And so as you're typing that in the chat, I'll also share some mine. So let's say I'm teaching child development and I'm covering early childhood development. So a big idea that I might put in the chat would be something like children develop through interconnected physical, cognitive, and social emotional stages. That could be my big idea for my early childhood development unit. So let's see some of your big ideas of things that you are teaching right now that are relevant to your course. So feel free to either grab your smart device and do some Googling or pull directly from your content in your curriculum that you're using right now. Let's see some of your big ideas, or sometimes they're called enduring understandings. I'll give you just a moment to type those in because they can be pretty long. Yeah, so comprehensive input is essential to comprehension and fluency. Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, George, for typing in too. I want students to learn about changes to Florida Energy Code. Yeah, since 1985, tied to a related specialty trades course. Yeah, Terrence is talking about students need to connect chemistry with the structure and function of the human body. Absolutely. Barbara, like one big idea for her students is to take away from business communications the importance of clear, purposeful, and audience-aware communication in achieving professional success. Yeah, so as you're thinking about these big ideas, like how does that change how you could prepare a lesson? Right. So for me, when I see these big ideas like for child development, children develop through interconnected physical, cognitive, and social emotional stages, I start to think, okay, let's break that down. Like where do my learning outcomes come from that big idea? Where is it the connection? And then I start to think of like, okay, so now I'm preparing them for a career where they're going to have the knowledge of early childhood development with physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional. Like where do those start to break down? Yeah, and Erica's talking about like the learning environment acts as a third teacher by fostering independence, safety, and active engagement. Absolutely. So are you starting to see how the big ideas can actually influence the course as you design it? Yeah, students need to connect that theoretical knowledge to hands-on clinical skills. Yeah, and level 2 field work. Absolutely, Kim. Well, let's do the same thing, but let's shift gears. So we had our big idea. And let's bring it down to that essential question. So let's say I'm still teaching my same child development about early childhood development. My essential question probably is something like, how do intentional interactions and environments influence a child's development and long-term outcome? So now I have this big idea about the stages of development. And now I'm breaking down this question to how do we have these interactions and what can influence a child's development and the long-term outcomes of that development and those influences on development. So now we're looking at the big idea, and then we're looking at this question that causes me to have inquiry and to question and wonder and ponder thoughts related to my course content. I also like to use these essential questions as bell ringers. So in the chat, share with us some of your essential questions, either for the big ideas that you just shared earlier or for another one. I'll give you just a moment to drop that in the chat so we can share some of our EQs with each other. Yeah, and Heather's talking about what can I do when I have big feelings? Absolutely, for those preschool teachers as well. Absolutely. What are linked genes and how are they important to understand human genetics? Right, that's a great EQ. It's making me think like, what are linked genes? But then also like, oh no, how do they impact me as like a human and like my genetic makeup? Right. So those essential questions are really starting to have students think about the content, which is what we want. We want students thinking about content because we know that's how they internalize it and how they really learn the content, but also start to like ponder and think and ask questions, which is what we want. I'll give you just another moment to see if any other essential questions come in as we learn with and from each other. And then we have about 6 minutes, so we'll start to wrap this up quite quickly. All right. So I'm not seeing any others come in, so let's keep rolling. So we're going to pop up another poll. So thinking about how we have kind of gone through this idea of big ideas and essential questions. We've looked at the characteristics, the definitions. You've had a chance to kind of share some essential questions and some big ideas in the chat. Thank you all for your vulnerability and for sharing and collaborating in the chat. That's exciting to see. Let's take one more poll and kind of see where we're at from the beginning. So kind of after the last, 20 minutes, can you write a big idea? Can you write an essential question? And can you use both of those in a course design? So go ahead and select your answers. You can select multiple answer choices in this poll and then hit that bluish purple submit button. And let's see where we're at. And so as some of the responses start to come in, it looks like most people are saying, like, I can use both of these in my course design. So you can write big ideas, you can write some essential questions, you can use both as you're designing courses. All right, I'm going to close that one. Now in the chat, at the very beginning in the chat, I had you complete a sentence stem that said, I think an essential question is, and you completed it. I would love for you now, after the discussions we've had, to go back and finish this sentence stem. So after today's session, I think an essential question is, and fill in your response in the chat. Share with us what you think an essential question is now. And then to yourself, you can also kind of note any changes in your thinking that you've had over the last 20, 25 minutes. Let's see where we're at. What's an essential question now? Yeah, it provokes thinking. Absolutely, Kay. It's a way to invite students to discuss and think towards a topic. Absolutely, George. Yeah, the asking of why, Steve. Ingrid, divergent. Yep. How else would you say that? What I think an essential question is, yeah, Jen's adding on to her original. It's the connection to the real world, which is so great because that's what we do naturally in these career and technical education courses is really connect to the real world. It's an exploration and analysis of an essential topic. Yep, it's a question that probes reflection, right? I never thought about an essential question like probing reflection. I always thought about like this like big esoteric kind of question for learning, but really to promote that reflection and reflection in our learning is what it does. Yeah, so Stephanie's also talking about it draws on critical thinking skills. It encourages a deeper analysis. Absolutely, y'all are all right on pace. So let's sum up today. We're going to kind of summarize what the session is, like as we wrap up essential questions and big ideas and really thinking about how they anchor our course design. The key takeaway is probably like when we design instruction around essential questions and these big ideas or enduring understandings, we really move beyond content delivery, right? We move towards more meaningful learning. So we give our students a reason to think. And together, we really help our students connect that learning to the real world, which are things you mentioned in the chat. They transfer their understanding beyond the classroom or the lab environment to the real world. And we hope that they engage more deeply with the course and the course content. So this is kind of how we anchor our courses, not only in what we cover, but what truly matters for our students and for learners. Yeah, and Ben just typed in essential question requires students to support answers and reasoning and evidence. Absolutely. So today, if you've been part of our instructional design webinar series, we started with like UBD, Understanding by Design, the Universal Design for Learning. We looked at kind of them putting together. And today we started looking at essential questions and big ideas, which is usually kind of when you're writing a lesson plan, kind of where you start. It's what things that you'll see up there first. We would love for you to join us next month. We will then move from big ideas and essential questions to objectives, learning outcomes, assessments, and instruction, and kind of what I like to call that golden triangle of instruction or design. So looking at how those all interact together to kind of create this seamless lesson that offers clarity and offers meaningful outcomes to our students. So this session is going to be on May 9th at 2 p.m. Central. It will be recorded as well. It's going to be facilitated by Christina Thomas, who is the learning design specialist here at GW. So like all of us on the call, she too has been a teacher. She's worked in ed tech. She's great at coaching others. And so she's going to lead that session, which will be amazing. So it's May 19th at 2 p.m. Central. Thanks for clarifying. So with that, I'm going to say, join us next month on May 19th. Thank you for spending the last 28 minutes with us. And of course, the last thing, we always love feedback. So scan the QR codes, tell us, give us some feedback from today's session, and we can't wait to see you in May. So have a great week, and we will see y'all soon.